The idea of today's show was to really kind of get in tune with one of what I think is the YouTube stars out there that is talking about investing. That's none other than Clayton Morris, who is the host and creator of Morning Invest. Maybe you already know that show. Great to have you on the show, man.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Love the channel. Love what you guys have been doing over there. I've been watching for quite some time, and I like the variations that you've been able to bring to the channel. A lot on the real estate side, evolving into more, almost like trading investing, and then a lot in the crypto space. So we're gonna definitely pick your brain. Let's kind of jump into it today, Clayton. When you look at where the bear market, or if the bear market is here, a lot of people are kind of looking at cryptocurrency as kind of the one indicator that kind of helps in the investment markets in general. What is your thought right now if we're in a bear market, or do you think this is recently has just been a correction?
You know, I'm looking at the indicators today. I spent a lot of time on our live show this morning just deep diving the charts and the indicators over the past 24 hours. And I'm not prepared to say one way or the other where we're in a bear market or a bull market right now. I think we're sort of sitting in between this spot, but there are a lot of bullish signs that I'm seeing, certainly on the Bitcoin side. Looking at Bitcoin today, I'm seeing, we're seeing higher lows. So there's a couple of really good indicators that we're laddering up to a good breakout point. And if we look at a couple of Fibonacci sequences, not to get all technical and nerdy, but history is lining up and starting to repeat itself on these lines. And we want to go back to the early days of Bitcoin, all the way back in its history. You're seeing these bubbles that continue to rise. And so we could be about to have another breakout moment. But I think all around right now, we're having concerns about inflation. Certainly, you're seeing real concerns about inflation in the market and the government continuing to print money. So I guess it really depends on what sector. Are you worried about the government printing money, $6 trillion additional dollars? Are you worried about the value of the U.S. dollar? To me, that's where my real struggle is. Like, to me, I'm always bearish on the U.S. dollar, and that's where I have my biggest concern. So for me, I look for stores of value, whether it's real estate or whether it's cryptocurrency, things that I can use as perhaps a hedge against inflation.
Yeah. When you look at, because I follow a ton of different experts and pundits on the crypto side of things, and a lot of them use historical analysis as well as TA to kind of help draft a future for what cryptocurrency might be in today. I guess my question has been, as we've been analyzing it for the past several months here recently, with kind of understanding where some of these ebb and flows are moving. My question is, do you feel like the technical analysis today is quite a bit different because of all the different variables that have kind of been pushed into the market, meaning the cryptocurrency market, especially around institutional finance, which is different than it was in 2013 by a big and large amount. Mm-hmm. And then also the amount of education that's out there now for the retail investor, because you've got shows like yourself, what we do, many others that have been very successful, and I think been doing a good job in terms of just getting the word out there on how cryptocurrency is moving. Do you think that we can repeat with all those factors that are playing into the market now?
Well, a couple of good questions there. I mean, I think you bring up a great point about the education space. I think this is such an empowering time in our history where someone can sit down and watch your channel, watch my channel, sit down and, each of us maybe brings different pieces of value that they can learn. They could sit down with a notebook at night. I mean, that's what I do. I sit down and I study different charts, studying different accumulation patterns at night. And I'm charting things with my Apple Pencil on my iPad and taking notes. I've got whole folders of different chart patterns and things that I'm studying on a regular basis. And we're always constantly learning. So we have this incredible education moment, I think, in our world history, which is amazing. And people can, in a short amount of time, basically get a college degree in technical analysis and learn how to trade this market. The other question that you asked, which I find fascinating, is this idea that have the fundamentals of TA changed because so many people are now, institutional investors are throwing money into this at a rapid pace. I don't think so. That's a great question, because I think today, even if you're looking at the price of Bitcoin and you're seeing it sort of, it's in a boring phase just at this moment. It's finally getting back to some structure in the technical analysis patterns on Bitcoin, and the whales know it. The whales know that they can't jump in and keep jumping in and keep jumping in because ultimately they'll lose money. So I think maybe at large, you're getting maybe larger volumes moving into different areas, but I think the fundamentals are still there. And it's amazing to watch these patterns, as I'm sure as you know, like to look at, like a Wyckoff distribution pattern, which goes back, 100 years, and that emerged over the past week again. And so I think some of these famous fundamental patterns are still here. And I think, it's just showing itself once again to a whole new audience.
Mm-hmm. All right, so one thing that happens a lot in bear markets, both on the stock side as well as on now what is evolving in cryptocurrency, because if you think about, the last bear market, really kind of around the 2008 as kind of where the birth of Bitcoin became, which is a lot of people look to the financial crisis as being one of the instigators for Bitcoin. Yeah. But also in comparison to what's happening in traditional markets. So here's my question is, when you look at the traditional markets today and where cryptocurrency could be going if it is a bear market, would you see the traditional markets having any kind of impact on cryptocurrency should we see a big correction in the stock market? In other words, big correction comes, what happens to crypto?
Well, I think we see this across all sectors when we have a big correction. Everything gets affected, right? Mm-hmm. Money stops, people panic, people wonder, and especially new investors panic. But I think one thing is continually true. It's just it's the people who've been through this before, yourself, myself, through 2008. I went through the real estate crash. We wait and we know. I mean, why? Warren Buffett's sitting on billions of dollars in cash. Like, why? Because they know that these cycles emerge. And so they're smart investors, of course, are going to see this opportunity, but it's going to affect everything. And there will be, like in real estate, there's no one housing bubble. And I get so frustrated with people. There's the 2008 housing crash, the 2008, there were still pockets in the United States where they were actually fine. But people have this sort of large mentality, this sort of overarching umbrella mentality about markets. And I think you're going to still see areas of opportunity, even if we have this massive pullback and correction. People are going to sit back and wait till we see some accumulation and stabilize. They're going to see some other coins and different DeFi networks that are growing and have some opportunities. And you might still have some craziness in Bitcoin and Ethereum and the big boys, but there'll be still areas of opportunity. But I think everything will be affected.
Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on inflation? We are edging into a position where we could see some fairly heavy lifts in inflation. We'll see how that, and if it continues, do you think the Fed is going to help correct that again? What are your thoughts on whether this plays out?
I'm of two minds of this. One is that right now, the Fed had, given the track record over the past few years, one could argue, and I've seen a number of people arguing this, that the Fed hasn't made a mistake during this craziness. Mm-hmm. They've actually been the one sort of ballast strength, flagpole in this whole mess right now. On the other hand, and I don't mean to get into, hey, should they be buying junk bonds? Like, that's another argument. But what are they doing to provide stability? So are we then to believe that they're going to screw up in the next few months and not deal with inflation appropriately? Are they going to sort of sit on their hands and let it run too hot for too long or not enough? So that there's that side of it, which is, so far, it seems they've handled this well from a market standpoint, from a getting this economy rolling standpoint, and confidence in the marketplace. Will they screw up now? Like, is now their time they're going to screw up? Okay, that's maybe one thing on the table. The other side of this is, well, are they not acting soon enough or quickly enough? And there's that concern right now. Like, is the time frame too extended? And now you're hearing finally some members of the Fed talking about maybe moving into a tapering pattern earlier than they were going to, perhaps. Great. Maybe we should start having that discussion as the price of goods and services continue, goods across the country continue to go up. On my show every day, I ask people, what are you paying for gas? What are you paying for eggs and milk and meat? And my audience tells me, they're like, I used to be able to get this pork loin for, $9 for this. Now I pay $19. So the price of everything is going up. And it affects those people, the people at the margins, the most. It affects the middle class because they see it every day in their grocery bills. And that I'm worried that there is this massive disconnect between, the Fed and Wall Street and heartland America, who feels it every day. So that's where I'm most concerned on inflation.
And I think when you look at inflation, the question is, if it does correct, whether or not the Fed comes in and really kind of looks at some strategies to help kind of offset that, to keep the economy in a state of somewhat consistent growth throughout the next few years as we recover from this global issue. If that occurs, at least I look at this as potentially either one, helping to sustain the bear market the bull market that was happening in cryptocurrency. We've seen a little bit of kind of a hiatus, almost like the summer vacation for cryptocurrency. Do you feel like any of those kinds of trigger points could help create that jettison fuel we need to get out of this $32,000 to $37,000 price on Bitcoin, which seems to lead the market in a lot of other crypto?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think for me, again, I always say this on my show, but I think they're the three different types of currency, right? And the idea that the government currency, fiat currency, has always collapsed, always been devalued, always been debased. And crypto is really the people's currency, born out of what we talked about, the 2008 collapse and this idea of getting this money out of these corrupt government officials' hands, where they can just devalue and debase this currency through inflation and printing money and buying junk bonds and everything else. So I think at its core, it's an empowering store of value is Bitcoin. I think it's even wrong to perhaps even call it a currency. This idea that you're going to buy it and hold it as a store of value. We're seeing it in Venezuela and other countries using it now as a store of value against their collapsing government currencies. So I think if we do let this run hot, if inflation does run hot, more and more people are going to be turning to this, to blockchain, to a store of value that allows them to retain some of their family's wealth, and perhaps real estate and other precious metals and commodities as well, against this rising government currency. I think it only makes sense. And especially for those people that don't have access to banks, unbanked,
right,
for the first time in their life, they're able now to buy things, to have a digital wallet that's not controlled by Wall Street. It's incredibly empowering. So I think, to answer your question, I think as we move more and more towards an inflationary period and people on the margins are getting squeezed, you're going to see more and more people moving into cryptocurrency as a store of value and a hedge against inflation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think those are the kind of the evolution of just money and the monetary system overall. If you study it over the last 500 years, you can kind of look at the evolution of ebb and flow, and there always seems to be one particular currency that really starts to take hold. The US dollar, of course, before it was devalued off the gold system, was pretty much king of the hill. Then obviously the petrodollar came into play, and now we're dealing with the kind of printing capacity that we're talking about now. I want to talk about if we're in that bear market, and this is kind of prepping investors out there and just general average Joes getting ready to take a stab at doing something after what has been somewhat of a little bit of a recovery phase, because there was a lot of capital in the market, volumes were unbelievable. Do you see the potential for things like altcoins or other derivatives off of traditional investment strategies becoming a play in this potential bear market, whether it's now or 6 months from now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is where altcoin season comes from, right? The idea of a Bitcoin pullback, a Bitcoin boring nature. When Bitcoin gets boring is when altcoins get hot, and you get greater price swings, sure, but there's so many interesting plays right now on the altcoin space. And when you think about altcoins, all an altcoin is everything but Bitcoin, right? Even Ethereum is an altcoin by its very definition. And so absolutely, I think there's a lot of interesting altcoins that I'm investing in on a regular basis that are totally different than Bitcoin, right? If you think of like Bitcoin as a bank in cyberspace, then what is Cardano? Smart contract. network, or whether it's Dogecoin or whatever other meme coin you want to talk about. There's plenty of really interesting. I'm bullish on Polkadex. And they haven't even launched their mainnet yet, which is going to be a game changer. And so you have all of these other additional decentralized ecosystems, which are going to become a game changer, whether it's in NFT spaces for sports, whether it's in smart contracts for real estate. Someone asked me today on a live stream I did, like, when can I buy a house from you, Clayton? Like with Bitcoin. And I'm like, this is coming. We're still using these archaic wiring methods for closing on a house. Are you kidding me? And how much fraud has to be dealt with by Fidelity Title Company and other people because of all the fraud? Imagine a smart contract system in real estate, which would be a game changer. So there's going to be a lot of interesting things to invest in, even as Bitcoin becomes a little bit more boring, or there's a pullback in the big boys like Ethereum and Bitcoin.
For sure. All right, so let's say that investors out there, whether they're large, small, they've had a position, maybe they've corrected, they've been able to take a little bit of profits off the table. What are you looking at when you say, all right, you're an investor, you've taken maybe 25% in terms of your total portfolio in terms of profit. What do I do with it now? Because obviously you hear some people, cash is trash. It's you don't want to hold it. How do you go back in if you're in kind of this limbo state right now of, I don't want to buy Bitcoin at 37. I'm trying to buy at the bottom. Maybe 32 is the bottom. Maybe we're going to see a $25,000 Bitcoin out there. So what are your recommendations? I know you're not a financial advisor, just so everybody knows.
Right.
But when you look at it, the opinions of people who study this a lot, where are you going? What are you thinking in terms of where do you put that cash?
Great question. And I want to take the 30,000 foot level approach to this. I want to ask you, the audience, what type of investor are you? Are you somebody that wants to create a store of value for your family? So maybe you've got a child on the way, you just had a child, you're, in your mid to late 40s, early 40s, late 30s. Do you have some capital that you can move into cryptocurrency and make some short-term profits and pay capital gains on that in profits? If that's okay with you, great. We'll get there in a second. But then the other piece of this is, what is your long-term buy and hold store of value position? And to me, that's real estate. And so what I always try to educate my audience is, let's make some great profits in crypto. Let's make some amazing returns in a small amount of time, short-term, medium-term, long-term holds over a few months in crypto, and then take that money and roll that into long-term buy and hold real estate. That's what I do. So I think with crypto, if you're sitting there waiting on Bitcoin, just think there's so many other coins out there. There's so many other opportunities. Everything moves with Bitcoin, of course, but understanding that basic technical analysis, I think, is really important, and to pay attention to what that TA is showing you, and are we sitting now in an opportunity for you to buy Bitcoin at a discount? I mean, there's a lot of evidence to show that Bitcoin has run into $100,000 this year. There's a lot of data points to suggest that that's the case. Same thing with Ethereum hitting 20,000 this year. So I don't know, where you come down on those particular price points and price, and I'm not putting any price predictions out there. I'm just saying there's a lot of data to suggest this is where this is going. So if that's the case, can you buy in at Bitcoin at an opportunity on a small retest? Like this afternoon, I told my audience today it's 37, 35, and I said, to me, buying Bitcoin would have been smart around 35, 35.5, and it dropped back down this afternoon. I was waiting for this pullback. To me, that was a time to jump in at a Bitcoin discount. And all of these coins have, like Ethereum today had a nice, we're waiting for that to pull back on Ethereum. And once it dropped back down to 25.5, to me, that was the upper limit of what I was going to pay for it. And at the end of my show, it was up to 26.5. So it jumped up $100 in 1 hour. So there are all these opportunities. You just have to be patient and not try to have FOMO, fear of missing out on these things. When you have FOMO is when you lose money. So I would say, don't do that.
Right. Well, I think that's the other thing. Some people look at dollar cost averaging if they're in cryptocurrency, and you could, of course, dollar cost average down into what might be a bear market. If it could be going that way. That's a scenario and a risk that you definitely have to consider, unless you're in it for the long haul. Because if you're in it for the long haul, that dollar cost average probably doesn't mean as much if you're looking at a 5-year horizon or longer in cryptocurrency, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I want to jump back to digital wallets, because this is something that we've kind of looked at here on this show for quite some time. Obviously, in the cryptocurrency world and crypto asset world, digital assets, we kind of understand that. But what we're seeing now is the digital yuan in China. China kind of, to a certain extent, kind of waging war on crypto mining. Most likely we'll see a lot of miners move on. The opportunity now for digital currencies, the likelihood of having a digital dollar wallet from the US and other countries out there. Where do you see this going in terms of those digital wallets happening, especially at the nation state level, and whether or not that potentially could compete with crypto in the future?
I don't think that it's going to be well, I've gone back and forth on this, but I don't think it's going to be competition for crypto. I think it's going to be a necessity for governments, however, as a way to move money to people and institutions in a way that we can't with this archaic system right now. And we're not going to want to be left behind. The United States is not going to want to be left behind to China, which is already out in front of this, on this. And I don't know what the Fed is up to. They've been cagey about it. At first, they've said, Jerome Powell has said that they were moving more quickly on this. This is the top priority. And then they've come out and said that we're going to take it really slow and be intentional about it, which is great. We want to be intentional as the creators of Cardano have been at every level. We want to make sure that this is an intentional process. But I think digital wallets for Americans specifically is powerful. Imagine a crisis. I think of, their banks are shut down. They can't get access to phone lines or whatever. Imagine a Hurricane Katrina moment where you have an emergency situation where FEMA, federal government services, can be able to, because they have digital wallet. Everyone has their digital wallet. Everyone has a way to get access to capital funds in an emergency. They could immediately shuttle a certain amount of money to individuals in dire straits. Imagine a pandemic, who would have thought, right? Imagine instead of having to wait the IRS, having to print checks for 4 months to get out to people to be able to provide food for their family, within a flip of a switch, they can be able to provide that currency to the American people, a federal digital currency from the Fed, however it's structured, that could help alleviate a catastrophe. I mean, the fact that they can do that overnight or in a split second to save somebody on Wall Street, but they can't do it to get checks out to people that are hard hit in a pandemic. I mean, to me, that's a very important piece of this. As a competition to crypto, I just don't see it. I'd love to hear the explanation for how it would be, competition. I've thought long about it, but I just don't see it. Again, it's fiat currency, even in digital. It's digital form.
Just in a new form. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're going to be able to print as much of it as they want. So to me, there's no competition because it's still centralized. And if they can print it and control it, they're not going to have a finite amount of it. There's no way they're going to put a cap on how much they can create,
Yeah, for sure. Well, you look at that, it almost kind of sets up UBI. At that point, you also could be looking at kind of a restructure of the entire banking system to where it could go to central banks, and avoiding the need for the banking system in general, because essentially those are just depositories anyway for today because of the physical nature of how our monetary system works. Do you see that happening down in the next decade?
Next decade in America, probably not. Would I like to have it happen? You know me, I'm a progressive. I absolutely would. I think if we can spend $750 billion a year on missiles that we don't need to bomb countries we shouldn't be doing, then we should absolutely be able to provide some sort of assistance to help people like other countries do. Look at Norway, look at Finland, look at these areas that have the happiest and highest life index in the world, have people that are protected in a market economy that's not, it's not a socialist economy, but you actually have people that don't have massive amounts of student loan debt and so forth. So I think having an ability to provide some sort of structure and safety net to the American people would be profoundly life altering. And it would lift, I think it would transform our country. I think it would end an enormous amount of poverty. And I think to be able to have this access to this currency, think about all the people in America that just don't have bank accounts. When you're giving them the opportunity to have a federal bank account that they can go and buy groceries with, and they don't qualify to get a bank. Wells Fargo won't give them a bank account. So this, and it's kept for people that make a certain amount of money or are of higher class. And this would open up, I think, could really do enormous things to eradicate poverty in the United States.
Well, and it could also kind of help create or dissolve that line that you're talking about, because with that kind of scenario, with being able to get so rapid in terms of just transferring funds, I mean, it's kind of like what happened with the stimulus, which injected so much into the economy, which drove inflation, sure, because there was just so much flush cash. It also, I think, helped drive where the cryptocurrency market was, taking us all the way up to a $60,000 all-time high. So there are some seed benefits from that could really kind of play into it. I guess I would worry about superinflation like in the 1980s where we saw 13%.
Right.
Those kinds of crazy times, which were really unusual. When you look at the inflationary chart over the last 50 years, nothing like that had ever happened before. So that would be interesting to see how that would play into it.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead. Did you have
No, I was just going to say, none of us want to go back to 18% interest rates like in the early 1980s. Not that I was 7 years old or whatever at the time, but I remember my dad was a realtor at the time, and no one could sell a house. I mean, it was he worked for whatever it was. I forget what brokerage at the time, but yeah, he could 18% interest rate. Who's buying a house? So no one wants that.